Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, and it's great to see you all again. So, my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute, a global futures and deep futures think tank, looking up to 50 years into the future. So, I cross all technologies and trends, which is what we'll have a conversation about basically throughout this presentation. And speaking of which, in this particular presentation, I'm going to be showing you what's on the mind of the clients and the leadership teams that you at Accenture are actually working with. How they're thinking, what they're thinking about, what they're prioritizing, and why any of that matters anyway. And then we're going to put all of that into the context of ultimately what it means basically for the development of their businesses, but also the development of their workforces, markets, and so on and so forth. So, as with any good futurist, I have an agenda. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about future foundations. These are kind of some of the basics that are driving the future, a kind of 30,000-foot view. Secondly, we're going to be talking about megatrends. So specifically, societal, technological, economic, environmental, and political, or STEEP, as they're known, megatrends. Then we're going to be having a quick chat through a basic futures survival guide. Now, some of this basically you will actually already know, but I want to reiterate some points because as I go and work with a whole raft of multinational organizations like Visa, Samsung, Lloyd's, HSBC, and all these other sort of fantastic organizations, I can tell you basically what's actually on their minds and the things basically that either propel them to stardom or the things that hold them back. Then we've got hot topics. So we'll be discussing things like, of course, generative artificial intelligence. We'll be touching on the future of the workforce and other things, but there are some other hot topics in there for you as well. And then we'll be looking at sector dives where we'll just be looking at the future of three industries in particular. The financial services industry, the big trends dominating conversations in the boardroom there. The government sector, so typically what's on the minds of most government ministers and prime ministers. And then we'll be destroying an industry, aka the car industry. And I will leave that as a little bit of a surprise for the end of the presentation. So, with no further ado, when we have a look at the future, the vast majority of you will already be familiar with the term VUCA. It's been around for a decade or more. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So when we have a look at the future, lots of people say the future is VUCA. However, increasingly, especially in North America, they're now starting to add another acronym to the end of this, MAX. Because increasingly, the future is massive. So the changes that we are seeing are typically global or system level changes. Massive. It's accelerating, so the rate of business, cultural and societal change, as well as technological change, is accelerating. And that's partly because we live in an increasingly digitally connected society that has access to increasingly ubiquitous and democratized powerful technologies like artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. And then finally, exponential, because tomorrow does not necessarily look a little bit like today. Tomorrow could look completely different. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples on that when we get into the speed of change section a little bit later on. Now, these are my 311 Institute codexes. I'm a 13 times author. The last book that I wrote was actually written by an artificial intelligence, which is a story in itself, thanks to ChatGPT and Midjourney. But these codexes here, you can download them from the 311 Institute website. So you can go to 311institute.com/insights, or you can scan the QR code. Each of these books is about an inch thick. The 311 Institute Trends Codex goes into deep details on about 300 megatrends, and there's hundreds of thousands of statistics on things that you care about. The Educational Codex which is also wrapped into the Exponential Enterprises Codex, teaches you how to take an organization from 0 to done. And then we've got the Exponential Technology Codex that again is about an inch thick, recently updated, that covers over 350 exponential technologies spanning 50 years out in detail. So you can look at not only the technologies that are emerging today, but also the technologies that are already emerging that are even more powerful in the years and the decades ahead. And in order to try to visualize what's in some of these codexes, I created a little video of the 311 Trends Codex just to show you how many trends your customers are trying to get their heads around and just how complex the future really is when we actually start sticking our heads above the parapet. So here we go. There is not a single sector, there is not a single line of business that is not going through periods of disruption and great transformation and change. Now, when we have a look at studies by companies, basically like McKinsey, for example, it's generally believed that from a CEO's perspective, CEOs only now directly influence 45% of what happens to their companies. And that's hiring, product development, and so on and so forth. 55% of what happens to an organization today is now generally external. So imagine not having majority control as the CEO of how your organization develops, and so on and so on and so forth. Now, another survey that recently came out from PwC, this was of 4,500 global CEOs, typically in enterprise sectors. Staggeringly, 40% of CEOs questioned did not believe that their companies were going to be economically viable within 10 years. Now, a lot of this comes down to business model changes. But if you think about this from your perspective, almost half the customers that you talk to might think that in 10 years' time, if they don't change and do things differently, they are going to be out of business, or certainly not as prosperous as they could be. This is a major problem. And the findings from this survey indicated that CEOs are most worried about changing consumer behaviors. And of course, that's something that I see myself, changing regulations, but also skills shortages. You know, many of the CEOs that I talk to, their number one problem really is finding and retaining the right talent. And then technology-led disruption. Now, when we have a look at technology-led disruption especially, we are already seeing $50 trillion worth of global GDP, global value, being destroyed by new technologies. Now, you can think of this as, for example, oil and gas. If you have a $4 billion oil rig, 20 years ago, it was probably worth, on the asset books, $4 billion. But now, that core oil and gas business and all of the assets and infrastructure within it is actually now more of a drag on the business as the world moves more to renewables, which is part of a $92 trillion shift. When we have a look at generative artificial intelligence, for example, all of the value that you have within your organizations is, should we say, being disrupted, not necessarily destroyed, but it's being changed. In the automotive sector, we are moving from vehicles that you drive, you buy, to vehicles that you buy as a service that drive themselves. So Volkswagen in Germany, for example, have got huge numbers of assets used to build cars in traditional ways. Those assets are now not as worth as much in the future as they used to be in the past. However, the upshot of this is that as we see value being destroyed, new technologies are also estimated to create up to $210 trillion worth of new value. And this is really where I spend a lot of my time with my clients, trying to understand, where is this? What are the new markets? How do you move into them, and so on and so forth? Do we care? Now, from a technology perspective, we all typically talk in terms of just 10 general purpose technologies. We talk about things like 3D printing, blockchain, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality. We talk in terms of quantum computing, perhaps, and a few other things. But when we have a look at the technologies that your clients have available today to combine together to solve problems that customers care about, there are hundreds of different technologies on the truck today. 3D printing alone starts disrupting the $10 trillion manufacturing industry, and companies like Adidas are 3D printing sneakers in the back of their stores in Germany, which collapse their Chinese supply chains. When we have a look at things like 5G, it's estimated as a $410 billion opportunity. Artificial intelligence, recent surveys from Berkeley over in the US suggest that AI, and just as a bit of fun, is a 14 quadrillion, with a Q, opportunity over the next 20 years for the tech giants. That's a big number. Analysts love big numbers. We don't always pay attention to big numbers. When we have a look at Web3, tokenization is one of the biggest potential new markets for banks with tokenized assets and so on and so forth, with organizations like JP Morgan, as well as Goldman Sachs and BCG estimating that the tokenization market is worth anywhere up to about $64 trillion because you can tokenize everything. So what we have here is we have robotics technologies, manufacturing technologies, new communications technologies and AIs. We've got new materials. We've got new user interfaces. We have all kinds of things going on, new compute platforms, new electronics platforms, all in this wheel. And this is really what's helping to drive global disruption at speed. Now, when we have a look at mega trends, we'll go down the steep trends. Quite a lot of these aren't going to be a surprise to you, but I'm going to pull out some numbers for you. So when we have a look at economic mega trends, by 2050, it's estimated that global GDP will double. However, 80% of that GDP will be aligned to just 32 countries. So from your customers' perspective, when they are looking at long-term markets, customers are already starting to align to these 32 countries. When we have a look at the BRICS realignment, we see the global reserve currency being undervalued or being undermined as new members enter the BRICS. But as the BRICS start coming together to form new economic and trade partnerships that fundamentally move the, should we say, power from the current G7. So this is a significant global realignment that kind of ties into the bipolar and multipolar world. We have international migration. Now, when we have a look at international migration, certain environmental and economic factors mean that we are going to see a tripling of the number of migrants coming from climate-ravaged areas, and economically desperate areas. So we're going to see the pressures from international migration increase significantly. Megacities, it's estimated that by 2050, 65% of people will live in a megacity. But there's a bit of a catch to that in a moment. And as for wealth inequality, we are still seeing wealth inequality escalate. So in the boardrooms of your clients, there is this increasing juxtapositioning that they have to do when they talk about how they justify boardroom salaries that in many cases are now 350 times that of the average worker. And when we look at wealth inequality from a business market perspective, 1.5 billion people live on less than $2 a day. Now, when we have a look at the environment, obviously climate change basically is a major trend. Now, when we have a look at extreme weather, we are now starting to see category 6 hurricane classifications coming in from Japan as well as the US. Extreme weather payouts by insurers is now totaling about $3 trillion. And the number of multi-billion-dollar extreme weather events has now increased tenfold in the past 15 years. So increasingly, organizations that you work with are taking climate change and extreme weather and the impact of that on their businesses and their business planning very seriously. We have global sea level rise. Now, by 2050, it's estimated that of those 54 megacities, 30-ish will be underwater. So recently, I was working with the US government on their $1 trillion future of transportation and infrastructure bill. And when I was in Louisiana and Florida, the key conversations weren't really about what does the future of transport look like. It was what does the future of transportation in New Orleans look like when a third of New Orleans is underwater and people have migrated to Texas and there's very few people left in Louisiana. So these conversations about the environment are dominating boardrooms much more than they used to, along with other things. Resource scarcity. We've seen the weaponization of rare earth elements, for example. We've seen companies like Volkswagen buy up the vast majority of the world's lithium stocks in a $48 billion purchase. So resource scarcity affects production and manufacturing, but also supply chains and supply chain resilience. Sustainability, where we look at the circular economy. Companies like BMW and Adidas are trying to embrace the circular economy. So BMW has recently created the I-Concept car. Now, the I-Concept car is a car they want to bring to market in 2030 that is completely reusable and recyclable. Adidas have their relationships with Parley and Ocean Plastic. So again, when we look at sustainability, it's an opportunity for organizations to embrace ethics and the planet in a new way and open up new markets and demographics, while also, if they're careful, cutting costs. And that brings us to things like ethical capitalism as well, which is an increasing topic in the boardroom. We have water scarcity and stress. We've seen this throughout the world. By 2030, the United Nations says that 129 countries will be under extreme water stress. Now, what that means is that those countries will not have enough water to grow food. But if you look at California, if you look at Shanghai, droughts in those regions mean that the hydroelectric dams have almost been so low that they've not been able to produce electricity. Now in Shanghai, the government banned the charging of electric vehicles because they couldn't produce enough hydroelectricity for the factories. So again, when we're talking about business planning, both from an electrical and an energy perspective, but also basically from just a welfare and societal perspective, these are again much more prominent conversations than they used to be. When we look at political trends, which is a whole can of worms in itself, we've got China with its Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 to $2 trillion initiative to join up all of the supply chains and regions that China cares about in order to promote growth for China. So I do a lot of work in China, especially with the CCP and the ministries, as well as companies like Huawei. And China is a very unique market. We have the start of a bipolar world. This leads to a variety of different consequences, which I'll come to in a moment. We have fragile government, so a lot of democracies now are suffering from fragile government. Now, what that means is that they are increasingly incapable of being able to make a decision and turn it into policy or law. We see this especially in the United States, where both houses, Congress and the Senate, are split pretty much 50-50 across bipartisan lines. Whatever one legislature wants to do, the other one doesn't want to do it, which means that you have governments that are completely ineffective at implementing new laws, policies, and things. We have net zero pledges, which the vast majority of countries agree on, and that forms things like the EU Green Budget, which is a $300 billion green fund. And then we have strategic dislocation. Now, when we have a look at strategic dislocation, inevitably, as we start seeing the world split into a bipolar world and then a multipolar world with India coming up and other BRICS regions coming up, we see many, many customers who are now moving their supply chains, their factories, even their people out of particular regions for particular reasons into others. So, for example, India has been a significant beneficiary of manufacturing capacity that's moving out of China. So strategic dislocation is again on the agenda of every board that I talk to. And they try to figure out, what do we do? Where do we go? Where are the safe countries? So typically countries are aligning along cultural values. When we have a look at societal trends, we have an aging population which is affecting countries like Germany and Japan from a workforce perspective, the algorithmic society. So increasingly everything that you see, everything that you're offered is as the result of an algorithm. The partners that you are matched with, that's an algorithm doing that. The products that you are shown, that's an algorithm. The customer service, how the customer service agents behave with you, that's an algorithm. The loans that you get offered or don't get offered, that's an algorithm. So we have this very clear algorithmic society. The news that you get shown, that's an algorithm. So increasingly as a society, we are now expected to trust that these algorithms are acting in our own favor. And generally they're biased and generally they're not. We're seeing global energy demand. Over the next 20 years, it will triple. But it's going to shift to renewables. Conversation on the energy sector maybe. Global population growth, we're already at 8 billion people moving to 10 billion people in this time frame. And then jobs automation, which we will discuss in a bit more detail later. It's estimated that 80% or up to 80% of the jobs that we have today can be partially or fully automated. So this is driving major anxiety and fear for the future, not just in millennials and the younger generations, but in older generations as well. So when we start looking at all of these different trends, there is this increasing fear of the future that we see globally, and that's being picked up in surveys and studies around the world. And when we look at technology, lots of things we could talk about in technology. We've got artificial intelligence, which we'll talk about in a bit, and robotics, which are both physical robots, but also software robots like RPA and so on and so forth. Merged realities. So I don't talk about the metaverse per se, but we are going to see the physical, digital, and virtual worlds increasingly coming together. Quantum technologies, this isn't just quantum computing. So quantum computers are billions times more powerful than even the biggest supercomputers today. This is also quantum communications networks. that banks like the HSBC in the UK are already using to secure their financial trades against hackers. So quantum technologies as a category are really very interesting. But quantum networks and quantum sensing and quantum computing are absolute game changers for all of your clients. We're seeing the rise of a technopolar world because as different economies like China and the US fight one another, we see China having their own technology standards and everyone else having their own technology standards, which means that Chinese artificial intelligence, Chinese energy systems, UHVDC energy systems, Chinese quantum computing, Chinese 5G standards are different to others, which then means that combined with the Belt and Road Initiative, if we have Chinese 5G being deployed in Africa, it might not work with other or interoperate with other 5G networks in the regions, which then increases not only the cost to customers, but the costs to you to manage and integrate it all. And then we have Web3. So Web3, blockchain, crypto, tokenization, all that kind of stuff, which is very slowly changing the fabric of the internet, business, and so on and so forth. Now, I mentioned that we had a basic survival guide to the future. Now, some of this basically might sound quite basic, but doing it and implementing it gets most companies twisted up in knots. So, the first thing to understand is that there are three economies that really companies are interested in and should be aware of. We have the physical economy, a physical product. We have a digital economy, a digital product that's available as a subscription. But then we have a virtual economy, virtual assets, virtual products. Virtual products and assets are different to traditional digital assets and products, which is why we make the distinction. Now, the physical economy is huge. It's about $80 trillion. Digital economy is currently about $20 trillion. The virtual economy estimates vary between $6 to $12 trillion. And when we have a look at companies like Adidas basically will sell you a physical trainer. They will sell you a Runtastic running subscription, a digital subscription, and then they will sell you a virtual copy of the physical trainer that you just bought. So 5 digital products. It used to be the case that if you were a company, you had one shot at selling your customer one thing. Now you can sell them a physical trainer, a virtual trainer, and an app. So from a company revenue perspective, being able to explore the interplay of these three economies is crucial. Now, change is constant. No surprise there. However, the companies that I work with, you can spot the ones that are going to be successful or that are more likely to be successful because they just have an open-minded culture, an explorer's mindset. Your company culture increasingly determines whether you prosper in the future or fall, not fail, because you kind of die into obsolescence. But the companies that have the biggest market caps, the companies with the biggest market opportunities and shares and everything else, are those that embrace risk, experiment, explore, try to understand what these new things are in other industries and how they could be applied to their own industry and circumstances. So culture eats strategy for breakfast. Customer first. I lose track of the number of clients that I sit in and they say, we always put our customers first. They think that, but they generally don't. Let's take the banking sector, for example. If the banks put customers first, then when I give a bank like HSBC my cash, my money, why do they pay me 0% interest? While taking my cash and loaning it out at 20% to other people. Is that customer first? It's not customer first. And yet all banks say they're customer first. I say that banks are the Facebook of the financial services world because we give Facebook our data and it sells it and makes money off our data when we really get nothing in return. We give banks our money and they loan it out to other people and make money on it and don't give us anything in return. So when customers say, or when clients say they are customer first, challenge them on it because they say it, but when you go and talk to customers, they generally aren't. Now, from a customer first perspective, follow the trend lines, not the headlines. If we were having this session last year, I'd be talking about the metaverse. The year before that, blockchain. The year before that, cloud, digital, and everything else. So when we have a look at the metaverse, for example, the metaverse went up the hype cycle and then came straight back down again, with many metaverse areas sort of being shuttered, but still experiments going on, admittedly. Trend lines are short, medium, and long-term trends that organizations can latch onto as constants. Headlines are here today, gone tomorrow. Make sure that you know the difference between a long-term trend and a headline. Faster, faster, faster. One of the biggest problems that organizations have is moving at speed. The world around them is now moving at speed. There are new competitors moving in from other sectors faster than ever before. Technology-led disruption is faster than ever before. Societal change is faster than ever before. So from an organizational perspective, from a business and process perspective, a project management perspective, project perspective, how we lay out our technology stack and our consulting practices, speed matters. If you spotted a new opportunity tomorrow, how fast could you move? How fast could you embrace it? And if you say really fast, and your clients say really fast, do what I do. Challenge them and say, prove it. Because when you challenge a client that says they can move at speed, 98% of them can't. And then suddenly they're in, oh, hang on, whoops, we thought we could. Now, from a global perspective, we're seeing the rise of many more entrepreneurs and solopreneurs than ever before. The cost of starting a business has fallen by 20,000-fold in the past 20 years. As an individual, if I have an idea today about a new product that solves a problem, I can have almost instant access to capital, whether it's crowdfunding, private equity, venture capital, banks, and so on and so forth. I've got almost instant access to expertise. I don't know how to do something. I know a million people who do. I can look it up on YouTube. So instant access to expertise and almost instant access to resources. I'm looking for somebody to help me with my one-day drop shipping business. We can help. So the power of the individual to start businesses is more powerful now, or greater now, than it's ever been in human history. One person can now start a business and almost for free, they can scale it globally. They can sell stuff instantly. I could start an app business, and if I know how to execute, I could arguably have my app in the hands of 3.5 billion connected people by the end of the day. Now, what this means to your clients, your larger clients, is there's more disruption. Because all of a sudden you have 100 million people who've started new businesses in the past year who can now nibble away at your value chains in ways that would have been very, very difficult to do 20 or 30 years ago. And then we have this, speed. It took the telephone 75 years to hit 50 million users. It took Pokemon Go 19 days. It took Facebook Threads 1 day. If companies can execute properly, Mark Zuckerberg, when he launched his cryptocurrency Libra, he could have had that cryptocurrency, had the regulators approved it, in the hands of 2.2 billion people by the end of the day. And it would have changed global banking overnight, according to the chairman of the People's Bank of China, the Bank of England, the US Fed, and the ECB. So increasingly, organizations that you work with can no longer be confident that tomorrow there won't be a significant new major competitor in their marketplace. When Amazon bought Whole Foods, Amazon's stock went up $13 billion. Everyone else's stock, like Walmart, tanked. And in fact, Jeff Bezos made more money in stock gains than it cost him to buy Whole Foods. So being able to disrupt markets, global markets, is easier and can be done faster than ever before. Now, let's talk some hot topics. So, mind your boundaries. Now, I travel globally, and this is sort of one of the main topics of conversation in 60 to 70% of boardrooms. The digital death of boundaries. As an organization increasingly becomes a digital organization from the back office to the front office, it allows them to identify new market opportunities in adjacent industries that they can then move into faster and at lower cost with less resources than it would have taken them originally. So this leads to sector convergence. Now, it also leads to the death of sectors. Now, when you have a look at your practices, you're aligned to industries. However, today you think of a telco as a telco, a car company as a car company maybe, etc., etc. A retailer as a retailer, a bank as a bank. But what happens when your clients, now being digital natives, start moving into new industries? What industry segmentation do you start applying to NIO, the electric vehicle car company in China? Because is NIO a car company that makes electric vehicles? Are they a food company? Are they a lifestyle company? Or are they all of the above? NIO, which many people think of as an electric vehicle car manufacturer, is actually a super app. They sell 1 million lines of food, they sell connected home, and they sell lifestyle services. This could be Mercedes, this could be Volkswagen, Ford, General Motors, and so on and so forth. But when we talk about banks, if you have a client team that looks after JP Morgan, which you do, is JP Morgan a bank or are they a travel company? They are on target to become the United States' 3rd largest travel company. The reason being they've moved into this market because they've spent $12 billion a year becoming a digital neobank. We'll be cautious with that term. But by being a travel company, people need to finance their holidays. So it gives them the opportunity to open up new markets, new demographics, new customers they wouldn't have had before. It also gives them the opportunity to loan out money in new ways. It also lets them take on American Express. So JP Morgan is increasingly also a travel company. So is JP Morgan in your leisure and tourism sector or in the finance sector? Vodafone. Vodafone across Africa via Vodacom now provides finance and banking, as well as small loans. Vodafone, a telco, is increasingly in the financial services industry. Same with MTN across Africa. So when we have a look at super apps, really Asia and Latin America are the two main continents that are leading the super app charge. But it used to be the case that super apps used to be a delivery company or a food company would move into insurance. But now we're seeing other established incumbents now starting to pick up the super app playbook and wonder what they can do. Revolut in the UK now build themselves as a super app. And that's before we go anywhere near WeChat and WhatsApp and all the usual tech giants and everything else. Now, operating models. So on the one hand, we're all used to the gig economy. Your clients in different ways will tap into the gig economy as and when. 36% of millennials in the United States are employed by the gig economy. But we are now seeing the rise of the machine, the robot gig economy. Because, for example, if your marketing team wanted someone to create an image, they might go to Fiverr and ask someone with skills to create an image for a piece of copy. But now you use Midjourney or artificial intelligence. Where's the human? So this is a very slowly upticking trend, but increasingly we're starting to replace large swathes of the gig economy with the robo or machine gig economy. And that has significant consequences for the future of work, the workforce, and the people who rely on the gig economy. When we have a look at post-digital, I know that as Accenture, you've marketed for a very long time about the post-digital era. I was in Paris about 4 years ago with your leadership team, and we were talking about the post-digital era. Increasingly, I think organizations are moving from the digital era to becoming algorithmic organizations. No one really talks about this, but if you think about your organizations, they use algorithms, AI, to identify and hire new talent and vet new talent, to manage the performance of employees. In Uber and Amazon's case, not only do they use AI to monitor the performance of employees against KPIs, those AIs fire people when they don't hit their targets. So be wary of this. And in the boardroom, we see more boardroom members using AI to assist with decision making. So as organizations become digital, I would argue they are also increasingly becoming algorithmic organizations. And that's before we start talking about decentralized autonomous organizations that run themselves. And there are 15 of those. It's argued that we can actually eliminate everyone up to the CEO. Companies like Bridgewater, who have $160 billion under asset in the US, are trying to automate all 1,500 of their staff so that it's just one big algorithmic brain that is managing the investment portfolio for clients. So this is an upticking trend that I don't think a lot of people really talk about or really actually dig into. Now, generative AI. I've been talking about generative AI for 10 years. I've done it with a lot of the other forums that I've done for Accenture. Now, I used to call generative AI creative machines for a variety of reasons. They didn't have a name back then. I wrote a book on generative AI 4 years ago. My son used generative AI to write a book 6 months ago. And we used Midjourney to annotate it, ChatGPT to do the text, and so on and so forth. So generative AI, though, when we focus on just content, you're missing what generative AI as a massive umbrella category is really about. Because increasingly we have AIs that are creating and designing new products like this rocket engine from Hyperganic. It's a rocket engine that was designed by an AI. It's a single piece of product that can be 3D printed. Under Armour, the one in the middle, that Under Armour sneaker called the Architect was designed by artificial intelligence. It's not ChatGPT. And then we've got AIs that are writing code. We've got AIs that are translating legacy code into modern code like Java and Python and Ruby. So we've got universal translators. So generative AI is not just ChatGPT and large language models. It's much broader than that. From Under Armour's perspective, they managed to use generative artificial intelligence to cut the amount of time that it takes them to design and then fabricate a new product like the trainer by 98%. Google is using generative AI to design new AI computer chips faster than before. Now, what does this mean? It means that companies can produce software and hardware products faster than ever before. So what does that mean? It means the world is moving faster than ever before. So back to our original slot or chapter we talked about, when dealing with the future, speed matters, because what happens when all of a sudden your competitor brings out a brand new product and you didn't know it was coming? Toyota are using generative AI to design new electric vehicle batteries in 2 weeks. They'd normally take 2 years. That is a competitive advantage for Toyota. So when you think about generative AI, don't just think ChatGPT. However, AI is the tractor, the printing press, and the loom. Now, from a workforce perspective and a future of work perspective, you can really think in 2 terms. Your mindset towards the future matters, because you can be the person that is made redundant by the tractor, or you can learn how to become the CEO of John Deere. There is a path to get from where you are to harnessing these new technologies to make you better, more productive, more efficient, smarter. And I'll go into that in a moment. So when it comes to seeing AI as the tractor, if you see that as a negative, you need to change your mindset, because it's not going to help you. It's going to make you depressed and anxious about the future. Now, a little bit of fun. ChatGPT-4, or GPT-4, in numbers. So, ChatGPT has an IQ, a verbal IQ of 155. Now that puts it in the top 0.1% of humans. It has just 1% of the connections, neural network weightings, of the human brain. But it has 1,000 times more general knowledge than any human mind. And it learns new stuff 300 million times faster than the human brain can. And this information is from Geoffrey Hinton, who is known as the godfather of artificial intelligence. By 2037, it's estimated that artificial intelligences will contain over 1 billion times more knowledge than all of human civilization. This is what you are playing with for free via your Chrome or Edge browsers. Now, to put it in Geoffrey Hinton's words, this means that because ChatGPT has 1% of the weightings of the human brain, 1,000 times the general knowledge, it is a fundamentally superior learning algorithm. When we have a look at the future of work, companies like OpenAI, McKinsey, Oxford University say that 80% of all of today's jobs are partially or fully automatable. Look at that, think about your own jobs, and now think, oh bugger, right? This is what the news is pushing to us. Change your mindset. Because did you know that 100% of human jobs can actually be augmented using technology to make workers more productive at what they do? AI also democratizes skills and boosts productivity, because when we have a look at programming, I'm not a programmer, but Google Bard is. So I asked Google Bard when I was with Visa to write a Stripe payment integration in Python for Laravel. I am not a programmer, never took it at school. And yet, because AI can code, caveats, here's the code. So yes, AI automates jobs and tasks, but put an interface over the front of that and it democratizes access to those jobs and tasks for people like you and me that never trained in them. I'm a programmer now. Now, from a coding perspective, MIT have found that when you augment programmers with AI, their productivity improves 62%. And they're actually happier because if they don't know how to program something, they can ask the AI and the AI says, did you try this? So AIs used to augment people and human workers really make a difference. Now, around the world, we're using platforms like ChatGPT to accelerate learning within professional workforces, but also children, by 6 times. If you wanted to, say, learn a new topic that you didn't know anything about, go to ChatGPT and say, teach me about project management. And it will pull everything up and say, well, okay, here you go. And it will take you through it. These large language models within training and development teams are absolutely game-changing. You can now learn things 6 times faster than you could before for 0 money down. We have AIs coaching people on strategy. We have AIs teaching humans in call centers empathy. And then finally, when we look at the sector dives, finance trends, when I talk to banks like HSBC, Barclays, Citi, UBS, all the kind of usuals, these are really the things that are on their mind, as well as companies like Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. So we're seeing the rise of alternative payment networks, especially out of Russia and China. And these payment networks are alternatives to the traditional ACH networks and SWIFT payment networks. We've got Bank 4, which is customer-centric, AI and robo, that's being disrupted by fintech, which is really a traditional bank with a nice interface, being disrupted by decentralized finance, where we can do peer-to-peer loans, but also where companies like Roblox could end up becoming a decentralized finance platform, offering loans and credit cards and financial services to their user base of 300 million kids to disrupt a JP Morgan or a Wells Fargo or whoever. We've got central bank digital currencies and crypto. So central bank digital currencies are really rolling out in China, starting to be trialed very heavily in Europe as well as America. We've got human longevity, a little bit of a strange one, but a lot of the asset managers that I work with, so investors, wealth funds, pensions, as we see improvements in healthcare with people living longer, companies now reimagining how they do mortgages, how they do savings and loans and investments and categorize risk. Because if you have someone that lives to 100, they need a kind of different pension to someone who lives to 80, 84. Same day payments, we're seeing this basically with companies like MasterCard and Visa. We're also seeing real-time payments out of India as well as Brazil. And same day payments is now the way to go. And then tokenized assets. So these are tokenized asset platforms. And the tokenized asset marketplace is estimated to be worth about $64 trillion. So lots and lots of banks love the idea of tokenized assets, which is a big conversation itself. But we also have this, alternative money. I don't need to buy my Nike virtual merchandise any longer with US dollars or renminbi or yuan or the euro, because thanks to Web3, Nike will let you pay for products with moves. IKEA in Dubai lets you buy products with time. So we are fundamentally using Web3 technologies to rewrite what a currency is. When we have a look at governments, they care about this. I mean, governments are a big messy ball of blech, let's face it. But I work with all G20 and they care about agile and lean, data-driven, digital by design, and none of these are easy. You guys will know that none of these are easy for government. They've got green goals, innovation first programs. Almost every government I talk to is trying to drive an innovation first agenda because it grows jobs and growth and GDP. And then we've got the public debt crisis, which is now double what it used to be. Now, with a lot of the governments I work with, more and more governments are developing what we call economic development agencies. So these EDAs are designed to speed up the rate of government innovation and country level innovation. So in the center, you've got the EDA itself, the agency. The black hexagons, those are the sectors that the government cares about promoting, green, manufacturing, whatever. And then you've got the government. So the government then comes into these public-private partnerships, sets agendas with the EDA, and then the EDA is let loose to innovate new things under the with regulatory oversight, and the regulators giving green lights faster than ever before, things like the UK FCA sandbox. So these economic development agencies, which we especially see in the UK, parts of Europe, the US, but also the Middle East, as well as Southwest Asia, are really successful. And then I told you we'd kill a company. Let's kill the car companies. When you have vehicles that drive themselves, when you take the pedals, the dashboard, and the steering wheel out of a car, you have an empty pod. So Audi and Toyota, etc., already see the death of the car. But these pods are now autonomous, connected spaces. But going further and really pressing your thinking, we see electric vehicles now being charged using solar panels. So in Hyundai's case, this Hyundai charges itself using solar panels. It's an energy generator. It's a mini power plant. Now we take the energy that that car has produced, use Web3, blockchain, and peer-to-peer charging and peer-to-peer sales. Now suddenly the BMW that generated its own electricity can now sell surplus electricity wirelessly to the cars around it, or the infrastructure, or the smart city around it. So BMW is now an energy distributor. Electric vehicles have got lots of battery packs in them. So you plug a Tesla into your home, tied grid storage, and when PCGE in California need energy to support the grid as battery backup, Tesla is now a virtual power plant company. And then as cars drive themselves, Tesla's a robo-taxi company. So when we have a look at opportunity, there's lots of stuff being destroyed, lots of value being destroyed. But this last piece has really been about trying to show you there is new value in new places. There are new market opportunities that are made possible by human ingenuity and technology. Because these car companies can now become multi-sided super app platforms, which take them into markets worth trillions of extra AMO. So are you talking to them about any of this? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I hope you enjoyed that. My throat's a bit croaky, and I think we've got some Q&A.